This is Fictional Mindbender. Arcane's second season gave us standout moments, but none really hit the fandom harder than Echo's detour trip into an alternate dimension. A world where Hextech never existed, where Piltover and Zahn never fractured the same way that they did, where Vander, Milo, and Clegor lived, where Sitko never becomes a villain. However, the biggest change was Jinx, or rather, as she was originally called, Powder, in the main timeline. Here, Powder never suffers the trauma of cause and death of her family, and thus the following rejection of her sister, which then becomes the catalyst for her mentally unstable and hairline alter ego of Jinx. And this wasn't just a shock to Echo, whom it takes a long time to adjust to not seeing this blue-haired woman before him now as the same one who was trying to kill him before, but to the fan base as well. It's an unexpected what-if scenario that is wonderfully brought to life and leads up to the dance where Echo and Powder share a romantic moment and kiss before he then has to return, or rather chooses to return, to his own timeline, sacrificing the happiness that they both could have shared had he chosen to stay. But this is what is most interesting to me. I feel like many Arcane fans tend to conflate Powder and Jinx as the same person, just without the trauma. And there's good basis for that. The same playfulness is there. The genius is there. Even her hot temper is still there. And of course, the DNA is the same. Well, mostly. But they are not the same person. Powder's life bends, but does not shatter. Jinx's life shatters and never stops breaking. Powder and Jinx share the same shatter point and origin, but they are still two completely separate people. And here's the part that Arcane never says out loud, but constantly implies in roundabout ways. Jinx is asexual. Unlike her sister Vi, who starts showing attraction and eventually begins a relationship with Catelyn, there is never a point in the story where Jinx shows any interest in a single person romantically or sexually. And the tragedy being that the closest person that she could have had that relationship with was Echo, because of the bond that they had shared as children. And even their fight in the first season displays this, that despite being mortal enemies and trying to kill each other, they still recognize that bond and see each other in the same way, which was why Echo didn't pull the kill shot when he had the chance. But more than that, that Jinx deliberately manipulated that moment so that Echo wouldn't pull the trigger. Simply put, Jinx's mind does not operate in romantic sexual frameworks that Powder's naturally grew into. Jinx in season 1 is too distracted by her symptoms of PTSD, ADHD, and sociopathic violent tendencies. Since the disaster at the workshop, she has never had a single moment to consider what a quote-unquote normal life may look like for her. Hell, even her life before that shadow point you could argue was not normal to begin with. Relationships and sex doesn't even enter her realm of thought with any serious gravitas until she reunites with Vi, where it becomes now painfully obvious to her that Vi's affections for Catelyn are obstacles to rebuilding the sisterly bond that the two used to have, and just adds more fuel to the fire for Jinx's rejection issues. To seeing if Vi could now accept her as Jinx, even possibly if maybe she could return to the person of Powder again. Hence the climax at the dinner table where she kidnaps both of them, forces Vi to choose, and in that choice, as well as the accidental death of her adoptive father Silco, Jinx solidifies her path as Jinx and permanently diverges from Powder's path. You can honestly say that the twin experiences of familial loss, from the workshop explosion and the one-woman assassination of the council, damaged Jinx's ability to realistically conceive of deeper connections with others on an emotional level. She's too insecure at her core, and they're too deeply connected and tied with rejection and that insecurity, and that she's just a cursed person. And for the record, no, I am not saying that being Ace comes from past traumas that made him that way. Sexuality is a spectrum, and everyone lives in that spectrum differently and experiences it differently. How or why they experience that way and how they deal with it is their own business and should be respected. So let's not go there. Season 2 of Jinx, however, has her being slightly different. Now no longer not as manic or as psychotic, but just as dangerous, yet much more reflective. And now is also, too, a lot more suicidal. Someone who feels that she doesn't deserve anything in this world. I'm always surprised that she didn't try to off herself in the first episode of the season, if I'm honest with you. Then we see the second major divergence in character, and one that for a time starts to put her on a similar parallel path with her alternate reality twin, the rescue and adoption of the young orphan Aisha. This is the closest that Jinx ever comes to Powder's emotional world, so to speak. Not through romance, but through caregiving. Aisha becomes something of a surrogate daughter to her, and no partner nor sexual contact was needed for this. But, like her original family, was just formed out of circumstance. Jinx is still Ace at this point, but is allowing herself more emotional connection and intimacy with another person outside of her sister and Silco. And Aisha encourages Jinx in other ways as well that tends to feed her more positive qualities, such as becoming something of a Batman-esque hero and helping others for the sake of helping others. Something that was the furthest from of how Jinx saw herself as. Regarding Powder, the big difference for her is that the trauma that she dealt with from the loss of her sister in her own world did not impede her ability to connect with others, since they're still alive. And different circumstances, allowed her time to have a life where such deeper connections were not only encouraged, but were also low-key desirable. In other words, Powder is not Ace. Both are valid, both are human, but they are not the same. This mirror continues into both women's following tragedies: the death of Aisha and Vander, and the departure of Echo back to his main timeline. While clearly different, the effects still can't be denied. Powder's trauma from the loss of seeing her would-be lover leave is comforted with support, with a safety net, with community. She knows that the Echo that returns to her, who's from her own timeline, is not going to be the same person that she just fell in love with. And that Echo may actually be disturbed and kind of confused as to why Powder is now looking at him with such pain in her eyes where none had been before. But he and the others will still support Powder because that's just what they do, and that's what the world encourages. In contrast, Jinx again spirals downward out of control, but even more severely. Her suicidal tendencies become more extreme, though this time it's without the distraction and or anger that she held towards Vi. If anything, Jinx sees her sister's relationship with Catelyn as just yet another sign that anyone who gets close to her personally is just going to get burned badly. Therefore, out of love and despair, Jinx lets Vi go because, in her perspective, she was better off there. Jinx has no support, no safety net, no community, and she just feels that she's better off alone. Jinx then returns to her old home, burns the whole place down, and then tries to take her own life, not once, but several times. Each time stopped by the recently returned Echo, whom she barely acknowledges now. And I've already done a video on this. After the final battle, Jinx enters a new phase where, like the original Powder, Jinx does die in a way, but another woman takes her place. Hopefully one without the trauma, or at least someone who gets some amount of healing, but feels more free now from the baggage of her past, and maybe hopefully can connect with another community again, even if her original community that she came from now believes that she's totally dead. And this, to me, is the contrast between Jinx and Powder. While the two absolutely share a beginning, they do not share the same identity and are not the same person. This is Fictional Mindbender. Have a good day.